Hello, welcome back to a new episode, VansPotCast. I'm your host, Van, reporting from the new studio in Bergen Point, New Jersey, Garden State. Today's podcast is called United State of Cannabis. I'm going to discuss the current state of cannabis for medicinal veterans, as well as my cannabis travels across legal and soon-to-be legal states. States that have cannabis on the balance, as well as states that are expanding to psychedelics, like Massachusetts, in the search for alternative mental and healthcare. Discussing farm bills that are expiring and how this affects the current states that are using it to profit heavily on an interesting take. Discussing the states that have cannabis on the ballot today, Election Day 2024. Discussing the disgusting proliferation of cannabis propaganda by fake companies marketing fake cannabis products to teenagers and parents. A new trending syndrome being reported in the tri-state area called CHS, aka cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. A secondhand story told to me on my experiences and conversations with parents of teens and adults in the Jersey City, as well as in and around Newark, New Jersey. From my own experiences while shopping, dining, and speaking to them from my own testimonials with cannabis and my position as a cannabis liaison for veterans, by providing the best information I can about the best medicine coming from right here, the tri-state area. Kicking off the podcast, we can go straight into a problem I've seen pop up more and more lately. Preteens and teens, they're getting access to this fake synthetic weed and a group of drugs that we could just label mojo. Some of us in the cannabis community call it boof, but this is actually something being marketed at these gas stations, these smoke shops where these kids are going in, these smoke shops that are like mixed with bodegas out here in the tri-state area. Parents should be aware that the effects are unlike any medicinal cannabis that you're going to get at a dispensary, from a prescribed doctor, from a prescribed alternative care provider, alternative treatment center, your psychiatrist, your psychologist, depending on what state you live in. It's completely different. So this mojo refers to a group of new drugs made from natural materials, and they're sprayed with synthetic chemicals that resemble and they smell like the effects of cannabis because they imitate THC, the active compound inside of the medicinal cannabis that you're getting. So these drugs are packaged, they can be smoked, they can be sold as a liquid to use with e-cigarettes or e-units. They look like little vape cartridges in some cases. And, the kids, they develop these temporary highs, these temporary euphorias, and the synthetic drugs imitate the same effects. The areas of the brain responsible for pleasure, dopamine, memory, concentration, things like that. It can make it more difficult to learn, perform complex tasks. And since these kids, they're in these developmental stages, they're going to have a lot of many other negative effects. Nausea, anxiety, hallucinations, irregular heart rate, high blood pressure, paranoia. The list goes on, right? So you're like really worried, right? So we reached that point of the podcast where you're clutching your pearls, but it's okay because we feel scared, we're paranoid, we're anxious about our kids, right? But I'm here to tell you, I'm here to provide you the full spectrum of information. Not all of these products are the boogeyman. They are really great medicinal grade CBD products that contain natural cannabinoids obtained and sourced legally from hemp products without the intoxicating effects of THC. From various types of cannabis compounds produced from hemp products. There are some states that are voting on full legalization, not just the hemp via farm bills, things like that. We're not going to deviate and go into all the politics going on in other states because then the podcast will just take forever. But for me, and my personal experiences, I have experienced over-medicating edible THC candies while in California, and then subsequently drinking a high CBD content, low THC drink to regulate that amount of high THC that my body was having trouble processing. Despite the prevalent bad reputation, even the scientific community cannot deny THC. This fake mojo stuff that the kids are buying has few to no benefits other than being a glamorous targeted knockoff in a medicinal state as large and as populated as New Jersey. It's unfortunate that its addictive and its intoxicating effect have now made CBD a boogeyman to parents and mainstream media, while CBD on the other hand has been extensively studied as one of the hundreds of cannabis compounds without addictive and intoxicating properties, and that the derivative is especially crucial for the treatment and management of childhood epilepsy syndrome, many other syndromes that do not respond to anti-seizure medications, big pharma pills and things like that. Now that we're familiar with the boogeyman in this dilemma, we can focus on the correct terminology for medicinal THC, CBD, which again is very easy to confuse and mix up, especially when traveling to non-cannabis states. Our understanding of the effects of synthetic cannabinoids on the human body is based on the research on the THC contained in cannabis. So that's your percentages that's going to be on the back of the bottles. Your legal medicinal cannabis, natural THC, is relatively weak and only partial agonist of CB1 and CB2 cannabinoid receptors. Now just imagine this is like antenna 1, antenna number 2. These are your brain's open plugs, your body's open plugs, open receptors, and synthetic cannabinoids are full agonists with incomparably more significant outcomes because they're man-made and synthesized. They're unnatural. The earth does not grow them. They're man-made. It's like plastic. This means that a very high dose of THC does not affect the human body as severely as a small dose of an artificial substance, including the mojos that we discussed earlier and these booth gas station cards, e-cigarettes, and things that like to disguise themselves as licensed medicinal THC products. Now remember, it's not just limited to just cannabis. There's cannabis flower, there's lozenges, there's drinks, there's tablets, there's many different solutions coming from the plant. It's difficult to determine whether synthetic cannabis even stimulates those cannabinoid receptors to such an unprecedented degree, or whether they just act by interacting with all these other mixes, like a cigarette, right? A cigarette's got more than just the tobacco. It's got all of the flavors, it's got the nicotine, it's got the ammonia, and it's got all these things to make you addicted. And these non-cannabinoid receptor systems noticeably change in behavior occur immediately after consuming these booth drugs, and they vary in intensity. So it's becoming quite prevalent. It's becoming quite mainstream amongst these kids because again there's so many of them that are not licensed. They are not regulated products. They're not being tested. That's why they're appearing on gas stations shelves. That's why they're appearing in vending machines. And again, we don't know the strength and we don't know how the dosages are being consumed. So they have this unpredictable chemical used in the manufacturing process. We can go into this deeper and deeper, but just know that the synthetic cannabis can have many side effects beyond the feeling of that. So you have to educate your children and have these conversations if you are pro-cannabis, if you're voting in a state for legislation, if you just want to become recreational, if you want to become just a learned individual. Being educated isn't going to hurt them. Our children need to be educated about the cannabis as a plant first, with the medicinal but industrial properties as well. It's not a drug that has to be misused and be the boogeyman mascot for the war on drugs. It has enough research and terminology and has to be restated to our kids and to even our parents for that matter, because my parents still treat cannabis as this big boogeyman because of the long advertisement war on drugs propaganda. The terminology has been recreated. The education has to be re-educated. It's election day and you deserve to be educated. My name is Van and you've been listening to VansPotCast, the United States of Cannabis.